كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. We begin in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we ask Him to send His peace and blessings upon our dear beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and his wives and his family members and his companions who follow their example till the day of judgment, praying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala includes us in their legacy. Allahumma ameen. So we've covered about 20 signs or so, 25 signs, kind of lost count. Anyone been counting? How many signs of the day of judgment have we covered so far? So we spoke about death, the journey of the soul, life in the grave, reward and punishment in the grave. And then now before we speak about the day of judgment, it's the signs before the day of judgment that notify humanity, every single generation, that this promise is true, that this is something that is fast approaching. Our appointment for accountability with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ultimate justice will be established. That's one purpose of the signs of the day of judgment. What's another purpose? What else do we get out of going over these signs besides a reminder of the day of judgment? There's a couple of other things. Yes, Am? So how does it soften the heart? So that's the reminder of death. Signs of the day of judgment could also soften your heart. I just ask how, like just to see your take on it. It's not impossible. There's definitely some heart softeners in there. But the first benefit was that it's a reminder, it's like an alarm clock, that the day of judgment is impending, it's on its way, it's a real thing. And just like with an alarm clock, you can hit snooze or you can wake up and you can do something differently. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed that for every single generation. That no single lifespan even, a single lifespan of any individual of 20 years, even 30 years, 40 years, except a new sign will emerge or an old sign will be reinforced. It'll happen even more. So one thing is, again, the reminder that the day of judgment is impending. What else? Try to think. What else can you get out of these signs? There's at least two other things. Adam? How so? It looks like you guys are remembering the benefits of remembering death, which is fine, just not what I'm asking. Thank you. Oof. I was cooking up here. Not in the way that the young people say, in like literal way. That's true. But it's kind of what I said. It's right. It's a reminder of the impending nature of the day of judgment. So it's true, but it's in line with that first benefit. Another benefit that we get is... Yeah, Yusuf, go ahead. Okay, excellent. These are prophecies. They're evidence of the truth of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He couldn't have made this up. How could he have foretold that writing and reading, for example, would be widespread, that everybody will know how to write and read? How could he have known that? What evidence did he have for that? Or what indication did he have to make that educated guess? Was writing and reading a significant percentage of society at the time? It's the opposite. It's less than 10%. They say that when they're taking a picture behind your head, someone's, okay, I just thought, let me know in case they're playing you. When they said when the Muhajirin came to Medina, how many were they? How many people from Mecca left out of persecution to go to Medina and become and establish Islam there? How many were they? 2 people? They're not the only people who came to Medina. No, far more than 10. They estimate that men, women... Oh, he played you. He didn't keep it in the family. They estimated that with men, women, and children total is about 200 to 300 people. So 200 to 300 companions, men, women, and children including, make the hijrah from Mecca to Medina. And they say that those that could write and read of them were less than 30. It's like 10%. So in terms of the Arab society in general, it's 5 to 10% literacy rate. And that's not too different than the entire world at the time. So the percentage itself doesn't reflect that. Was writing and reading on the rise? Not at all. So it's something that makes you think, how did he know that? Where he said that trade and marketplaces, like we spoke about last week, will be everywhere. How could he foretell that? that the Turkic people, which many have interpreted to mean the Mongols, invade this ummah. How could he foretell that when it happened over 500 years after his death, sallallahu alaihi wasallam? In other hadith, he said that the Turkic people will rule you. And this is what happened in the ummah as well. When the Seljuks took power about 6 centuries after his death, where they become the primary force of power in the ummah. And then that's just when they became the primary force. They still didn't rule the ummah officially, just unofficially, by being the strongest in their armies. And the Turkic people, like we said, they come from the Russian steppes. They include they're the ancestors of the Mongols, of the Turkish people today. They're not exactly these same ethnicities. So one, that they will invade the ummah and they will attack it, and that was interpreted to mean the Mongols, and we spoke about that a couple of weeks ago. And then another hadith, he said, not will they will attack you and invade you, but they will rule you, and they will rule the Arab. And that's exactly what happened. The Arab ethnicity had the official leadership of this ummah, even if just by name, for many centuries, up until when? Around the 7th or 8th century Hijri, and then it was passed over to who? The Ottoman Empire. And then they became the rulers of the ummah for the next 7 centuries. So how could he have foretold these things when at the time the Turkic people were random, disunited tribes that the Arabs have never interacted with? That he foretold, for example, as we'll see next week, the fall of Constantinople, that the Muslim ummah will conquer Constantinople. That's like somebody today saying, choose a random ethnicity. I was going to say, this is how you find if someone's racist, but the Moroccan people, because you suggested it, they're going to conquer Washington, D.C. Yeah, we can hope, right? You can pray. So if someone were to say that today, the first question would be how? How does that make any sense? But this is what he's saying. He's saying you people as an ummah will conquer Constantinople. That happened in 1453. Over 700 years after his death, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So these are all, again, proofs of prophethood, that there's no way he could have known these things, he could have foretold them, except that he's a true prophet. So number one, it's a alarm clock, a reminder the day of judgment is coming close, so act accordingly. Make tawbah, hasten to good deeds, all these things that we spoke about. 2, it's a proof of his prophethood, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And 3, it is a lifeline for hope. Because people who witness these times and witness these descriptions, it's easy to lose hope and say, well, everything's going to be negative. There's no time period that comes except it'll be worse than the one before it, he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He foretold that. But then in the midst of all that, he said, Badiru bil a'mal, rush towards good deeds. You can still be a glimmer of light in these dark times. So the 3 things that you get out of them is it's a reminder of the day of judgment, it's impending, it's not some far off concept. Number 2, it's a proof of his prophethood, that he's truly a messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And number 3, it is a glimmer of hope. It reminds you to hope and to be the difference. And this is a big part of the theme, as we mentioned last week, the week before, and we'll mention again this week, that some of the greatest benefits or the action items for you is don't be of these descriptions. Just because he foretold that they would come and they would come to pass and they would be the norm, it doesn't mean that you have to give into it and accept it and you allow it to become your norm. So continuing today, I believe it's sign number 21 or 22. If you're keeping count, you can correct us. It is the zakhrafatul masajid, the decoration of the masajid. He said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the hadith, لا تقوم الساعة حتى يتباهى الناس في المساجد. The hour will not come until people decorate their masajid to the point where they compete with one another. They show off between each other with the decoration of their masajid. Is it haram to have a nice masjid? How many people say no? How many people say yes? All right, some people don't have hands, but it's classic. It's not haram to have a nice masjid. So what's the problem here? Yeah, Tara. So losing sight of what's important. It's not haram to have a nice masjid. But what's the boundary of a nice masjid? Can we have a gold microphone? What do you guys think? If we had the money, we give out sadaqah, should we go for a gold microphone? We should do it? If you want to. There are gold microphones there. In some masajid, there are. They're actually made out of gold. It's a real thing. Some masajid have that. Masjid Haram has gold microphones. They're actually made out of gold. So it may not be gold and silver in these items actually is haram according to a lot of scholars. It is haram to utilize gold and silver outside of currency or jewelry. That's according to many scholars. That this is the purpose for these things is to be used as currency or jewelry. And anything else that takes them outside of these uses is lessening the commodity, lessening the supply. So the demand will go up, the price will go up, economies will suffer. That will happen if people misuse gold and silver, right? So for that reason, besides explicit hadith about it, they said that it's haram to use gold and silver outside of jewelry or currency. But for putting gold and silver aside, just nice masajid, really nice masajid. It is about losing sight of what's important. You know, if we could see Masjid al-Nabawi, the Prophet ﷺ's masjid, the day that he built it and the day that he died and the generation afterwards, for those first few decades, if not the first few centuries, there's not a single one of us that would be impressed. Every single one of us would not just say, it's not pretty, we would say it is ugly. It had no roof. It had no carpet. It barely had walls. There was dust everywhere. And having lived in Saudi Arabia, I'll tell you, it was super hot all the time. Anas ibn Malik, he said, I saw the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and it was on the 23rd or the 25th of Ramadan. And he was praying and it began to pour until we were all standing in puddles of mud. And he went down for sujood sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and when he came up, there was a chunk of mud stuck to his face. But it was the best masjid on the face of the earth. And the people who inhabited it and left from it, and the teaching that left from it, was unlike anything that any masjid ever produced before or after. It's not about the structure. It is about what happens inside of it, and the investment, the emotional and spiritual investment goes so much further than the walls or the carpet or any other decoration that happens. And people lost sight of that. Which is why we have the hadith of Abu Darda where he said, إِذَا زَخْرَفْتُم مَسَاجِدَكُمْ وَحُلِّيتُم مَصَاحِفَكُمْ فَالدُّبَارَ عَلَيْكُمْ. When you now begin to overly decorate your masajid and adorn your mushaf, make your mushaf pretty, your Quran, you try to make that pretty, then know that destruction is upon you. You've lost sight of what's actually important about these things. The purpose of this structure, the purpose of this book is not to look pretty on a shelf or on a block. Because there's tons of masajid worldwide in some of the richest Muslim countries that are multi-million-dollar products that are filled with the most expensive furniture and upholstery and amenities and don't get 1 or 2 lines for prayer. They're empty. No learning occurs there. Sometimes, and this is some specific masajid, that the imam may come up and barely know how to recite. What did we get out of that? What does this structure do for us? Besides the israf, the waste of spending so much money on these structures, that's not what they're supposed to be. They're not supposed to be impressive in the worldly sense. Doesn't mean they have to be ugly, but also means they don't have to have all this investment in the structure itself. A man came to Umar ibn Khattab as the conquests were flowing and tribute was coming to Medina. He said, we have all this wealth. Uksul Ka'bata bil harir. You should cloth the Kaaba with silk. Make it something pretty. I've been to these other places and I've seen their monuments, I've seen their holy structures, they make them fancy. Why don't you change the cloth of the Kaaba to silk? He's telling Umar ibn Khattab. And he said, Butunul mu'minina awla. The empty stomachs of the Muslims somewhere else have more of a priority. That doesn't make sense to me. There's hungry Muslims out there. Why on earth would I spend an extra penny to make the Kaaba clothed in silk? You know how many hundreds of pounds of silk, gold and silver surround the Kaaba today? And a new cloth made out of gold, silk and silver is produced every single year. That cloth is changed yearly. It costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. While Muslims around the world starve to death in the tens of millions. Now you see the problem. Now you see why it is a sign of the Day of Judgment, a sign of the times. Anas radiallahu anhu, he said, يَتَبَاهُونَ بِهَا ثُمَّ لَا يَعْمِرُونَهَا إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. They will compete with one another to see how pretty it is, and then none of them will enter it. None of them will take care of it or give it its due right in its purpose. Double Parker? Classic. I was done with that point anyway. White Nissan KHN 1715. White Nissan KHN 1715. You're the man. I guess we're done with that. Next, he said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, أَن تَلِدَ الْأَمَةُ رَبَّتَهَا. I think it's sign number 22 if you're counting. 23 maybe. It's okay. You're the man, brother. Don't worry about it. It's Brooklyn. So, he said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that the bondswoman, the slave woman, will give birth to her master. What does this hadith mean? Yeah, Taro. So that's one interpretation. So this is actually the interpretation favored by Ibn Hajar, the famous explainer of Sahih Bukhari, where he says it's metaphorical. That the relationship between child and parent is most akin to the relationship between slave and master. Today's world, this sounds cringy. No, I'm my own person. And it's very difficult to change that mindset, but it's about time that we change it. If you think going into this relationship, how can I be a good servant? Very likely you will do right by your parents. How can I be a good servant? And it's difficult to do. It's not going to be easy a lot of the times. But it's something that we should train ourselves upon. So he says that is what the relationship of child to parent should be. Like a servant, like a slave. But towards the end time, they will flip it upside down. Now they'll treat their parents like the slaves. And you see that in some people's attitude. Did you wash my clothes? Did you prepare this for me? Speaking to parents or an expectation from parents as if they work for you. It's not how it is at all. Should be the complete opposite. As soon as you have the ability to serve, you should start serving. Irrespective of the treatment that you receive in return. You're not doing it for reciprocation. You're doing it to fulfill your duty to your Creator by fulfilling your duty to these people that He demanded, subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's one interpretation. Anything else? Yeah? So there's a few other interpretations. They all come down to this same thing, that conquest will become so continuous, so grand, that the Muslim ummah, the Muslim empire will grow in such a size and at such a speed and interact with so many different people that there will be actual bondswomen who now give birth, and the child is attributed to the master. So they will be the child will be of the ruling class, while the mother is a slave woman. And some said, for example, that the people would sell their slave girls, and then it would be so continuous, the conquest and the amount of people buying and selling slaves, that a person may eventually buy their mother without even knowing that that's their mother. Right? This is before people had the records that they had, and when you follow the conquest of the Muslim Ummah, all these things happened. So all the other interpretations are around conquest and how that the relationship between the mother and the child will have this huge social discrepancy, and that is something that did occur. So whether it's the metaphorical or the literal one, the benefit that we can glean from it is, how can I be a servant to my parents? How can I exemplify this servant-master relationship? And if that sounds distasteful for us, then we have work to do. Right? Then we may be a sign of the Day of Judgment, as the Prophet ﷺ foretold. The next sign, number 23. At this point, I'm just throwing out random numbers. Feel free to correct me if you're counting. We're definitely in the 20s. He said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, in the hadith of Abu Hurairah, لا تقوم الساعة حتى يتقارب الزمان. The hour will not come until time becomes in closer proximity in its nature. What else comes in closer proximity? We spoke about last week or the week before. Something else that the proximity between it will decrease. What is it? No, not fitna. He said fitna will increase, but the marketplaces. Remember he said the marketplaces closer. So that's something that we discussed last week or the week before. Here's another hadith where he says time will be in closer proximity. In another hadith, he said, صلى الله عليه وسلم, لا تقوم الساعة حتى يتقارب الزمان فتكون السنة كالشهر والشهر كالجمعة وتكون الجمعة كاليوم ويكون اليوم كالساعة وتكون الساعة كاحتراق السعفة. The hour will not come until a year, until time grows closer in proximity, such that the year will be like a month, and a month will be like a week, and a week will be like a day, and a day will be like an hour, and the hour will pass like the burning of a leaf. You set paper on fire, and as quickly as it burns, that's how fast time will go by. There's a number of interpretations here. What do you think they are? What does this mean to us? Yeah, Fuad. What? Productivity will decrease. People will be bums. Feels kind of personal. So not necessarily productivity, but there's no barakah. This is something that the scholars have said, that barakah will decrease. People hear a narration, like for example, that Uthman bin Affan recited the entire Quran in one prayer all night long. Then they'll go and do the math. They'll be like, okay, the longest part of the night is in the winter. The night is approximately at that point, if you go from Maghrib to Fajr, it's about 9 hours at its longest. So that means if you 604 pages, stop it. Stop doing the math. Yes, math is a part of it, but we know for sure that he didn't speed read. He didn't read the way that we see a lot of people read today just for quantity. He definitely read it in the way that the Prophet ﷺ taught. So how could he squeeze it in that time? It's the hidden factor of barakah. Barakah's definition, we translate it as blessing. But the scholars, they say the more accurate translation, if you want to get detailed, it's abnormal results from normal effort. They don't do anything special in terms of their effort, but Allah blesses it where it produces abnormal results. Why? Because of that link between you and Him. You have a special link with your Creator in your intention and how sincere you are, and how much you desire and are determined to do good and to please Him and to fulfill your purpose. So, what? He puts a special level of results in your actions that would have not otherwise been produced. My bad. So, seek it with Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nothing else can produce barakah for you. Nothing else can bless your efforts. See how seamless that was? That's called barakah. Nothing else can do that for your actions. And I've seen so many examples of this in real time. Simple ones and great ones. I remember a brother was speaking about, should I miss this exam for, if I remember if it was a protest, something of that nature. And then everything works out, doesn't it? Everything else immediately said, I'm going to do it. My intentions for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I really have to study for this exam. And then everything works out. The exam is either postponed or he aces it. Not that he didn't study and just does this, but he does what he can. He tries to move things around for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and everything clicks. That's called barakah. While someone could spend all night and say, forget prayer. Some people, they say that. They say, don't fast. You got exams. You have work to do. You cannot produce if you're fasting and your body is tired. So they break their fast and they pull out that supernatural barakah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides. So that way their 12 hours doesn't produce what 2 hours would have produced if they were obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is promising us. That the barakah will be there. He controls the results. So you don't ever have to doubt or be afraid that if I shift my gears, if I put too much energy into the deen, my dunya will suffer. That will never happen. You will never suffer by proportioning your attention to that which Allah made important. You will never lose prospects because you put on hijab. You will never lose rizq because you choose a halal job. Because even if the dollar amount goes down, even if the number of people approaching your house or your father go down, their quality will be imbued by that blessing that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can give. While a whole line of people, a whole line of callbacks that are haram for your interview, They will not produce the same results had you done the other way. Guaranteed. This is a promise from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All you have to do is shift gears. Make sure that the right amount of effort is in the right things. So one interpretation is that barakah will be less in people's time. They will not be able to produce in hours or days or weeks or months what the previous generations produced in hours, because they had that close relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why that you hear the stories of the Sahaba fasting on end, praying on end, able to do so much with so little time. Their days were 24 hours too. Their hours were 60 minutes. Time has not changed since then. The earth is spinning at the same rate. But Allah blessed their effort and blessed their time, blessed their physical strength, because they were close to Him subhanahu wa ta'ala and close to their purpose. They were aware of all of this and they acted accordingly. That's why you hear stories of like Ibn al-Jawzi rahimahullah, for example, when they analyzed his lifespan, how long his life was, and how many books. He's one of the most prolific authors in Islam who has the most publications, if not the most. And they said when they did on average from when he started studying to when he died, he wrote about 11 pages a day. No internet, no chat GPT, no Wikipedia. By hand, where you had to go and look up the sources, open a book, go purchase it, and it was leather bound and traveled hundreds of miles to get to you. And he wrote 11 pages per day while teaching simultaneously, while having a family. Same thing with Imam al-Nawawi. Same thing with so many other scholars that they say this work that is now studied on a university level, is now studied over a semester or two by people. He wrote it from Dhuhr to Asr or Dhuhr to Maghrib. How? It's barakah. It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessing their time and their effort. So if we want that in our time, in our effort, in our relationships, in our wealth, then we have to make sure that it is in line with our purpose, not in conflict with it. That's the simple equation. So that's the first interpretation, that barakah will be taken out from people's time, from people's efforts, such that it'll take them more time to do what used to take less time. That they can't get the same results from the same amount of time. So a year becomes like a month becomes like a week becomes like a day, and a day passes by like an hour, and an hour is like an instant. The second interpretation is that technology will develop such that what used to take this amount of time no longer does. And that's something that we could see in our day and age now. You can travel all the way across the world in 12 hours when it used to take months. You can contact someone across the world in an instant, and that used to take months to send a letter. So all of that has been shortened, so time periods have been shortened. This is a metaphorical explanation that makes sense as well. A third interpretation is that it's literal, that time will literally shrink. And this has to do, they mentioned, in the time of Al-Mahdi, in the time of Isa, which we'll get to inshallah in a couple of weeks. But it's possible. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in control. He decreed that the time periods, 24 hours for a day, 7 days a week, 30 days a month, all that can change. Right? There's other planets that spin at different rates or revolve around the sun at different rates, where their days are not the same. Right? Their years are not the same. What is it? Mercury, where its day is longer than its year? One of those planets, Mercury or Venus, where the time it takes to go around the sun is faster than the time it takes to spin around itself. So before a day passes on Mercury or Venus, one of the planets, I'm sure, you can look it up, a whole year passes. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala controls these things, right? He can change them as He sees fit. The next sign is dhuhur al-shirk, that shirk will make a comeback. The Prophet ﷺ spent his entire life and his entire mission to make sure that people believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone without any partners. And shirk is giving anything that belongs only to Allah to other than Allah. So it shouldn't be the only image in our mind. Shirk is someone bowing down to a physical idol. But he mentioned even that will make a comeback. So if you look around the ummah today, there are many shirky practices, superstitions, rituals that were not taught by our deen, in fact were specifically outlawed by our deen. And that people brought those back, they believe in them, they rely on them. And it should be our life mission to make sure that every single ritual that we do, every single pilgrimage, every single supplication, every single concept that we tie our hearts to is purely in line with the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That I don't allow my heart to be attached or any rituals to be performed or devoted to anything but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what it's all about. Such to the extent that he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whoever meets Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with this concept purely ingrained in their heart and their actions are according to that, even if they come with a mountain of sin, no matter what sins they come with in front of Allah, but they have this concept purified in their heart, believed in, then they will enter Jannah. Allah will forgive them. That's how important it is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This isn't a green light to do whatever you want. Because somebody who truly believes in Tawheed and it's that deeply ingrained in their heart, it's going to reflect on their lifestyle. It has to. But if they falter, no matter how many times they falter, no matter how badly they falter, Allah will forgive them. As long as they believe in Him and only Him as their hope, as their creator, as the only thing that is worthy of their worship, then Allah will forgive them no matter what. But He said specifically, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in a hadith, إذا وضع السيف في أمتي لم يرفع عنها إلى يوم القيامة ولا تقوم الساعة حتى تلحق قبائل من أمتي بالمشركين حتى تعبد قبائل من أمتي الأوثان. So this isn't just shirk in concepts, but literal worshipping of idols. He said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when the sword is drawn amongst my ummah, when they start fighting each other, what's going to happen? We said this already. When they start fighting one another, when they draw swords against each other, the moment they do that, what's going to happen afterwards? They'll never stop. The minute that you spill each other's blood, it will continue internal conflict till the Day of Judgment. And that started in the time of the Sahaba and has never stopped since then. Muslims fighting Muslims, as He foretold, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then He said, and the hour will not come until certain tribes from amongst my nation rejoin the mushrikeen, do what they do, and they will worship idols directly. In another hadith, وَلَا تَقُومُ السَّاعَةُ حَتَّى تَضْطَرِبُ أَلْيَاتُ النِّسَاءِ دَوْسِ حَوْلَ ذِي الْخَلِيصَةِ. The hour will not come until you see the hips of the woman of Daws, which is a tribe, going around the idol of the Khalisa, which is a specific idol. And some scholars have mentioned that was a certain time period where members of that tribe reverted to shirk and started worshiping this idol again. And some scholars said that is still yet to come. The tribe of Daws is still around till today. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect them from such a prophecy. And all of us. So it's something that has happened, and the scholars differed over a metaphorical interpretation, meaning they'll worship idols in general, or is this going to mean that that literal idol will be reestablished? They're both possible. The next sign, number 26, ظهور الفحش وقطيعة الرحم وسوء الجوار. These are all mannerisms that people will exhibit. He said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the hadith, لا تقوم الساعة حتى يظهر الفحش والتفاحش وقطيعة الرحم وسوء المجاورة. The hour will not come until immorality and the spreading of immorality and the encouragement of immorality becomes widespread. We already spoke about that. And then he added to it people cutting the ties of kinship and being horrible neighbors. And the scholars, they mentioned how the righteous generations, they would have a very intimate relationship with their neighbors. He said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that if you cook some broth, what do you do with it? You add more water and send some to your neighbor. If you cook some soup, add some water. It's easy to increase the amount of soup. The quality will go down a little bit, but the quantity will go up. What do you do with that extra? You put it in your fridge for tomorrow, right? So you don't have to cook again. No, he said, send some to your neighbor so they can feel that connection. He said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in another hadith, لا يزال جبريل يوصيني بجار حتى ظننت أن يورثه. أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم, Jibreel alayhi salam would continuously advise me regarding good treatment to my neighbors. He would bring it up so often that I thought he would eventually include him in the inheritance. That when you die, your neighbor gets a share of it. I thought that was coming next, he's saying, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How many of you know who your neighbors are? I know one of my neighbors, he's here. May Allah bless him. And another one. How far do the neighbors go? What's the limit of neighbor? People who share your zip code? I hope not. 70? 7 houses? In which direction? In all directions? Non-Muslims are included. It's general. Neighbors. Neighbors is general.
You have to share a wall. So if I have a detached house, I'm good. No neighbors. Yeah. If we're sharing the earth, we're neighbors. That's definitely wrong. The scholars differ to what extent as times and neighborhoods and things change. Some of them said 70 houses in each direction. That the rights of the neighbor extend to 70 houses in each direction. 70 houses this way, 70 that way, 70 that. We might hit Jersey at that point, right? 70 this way. But the most priority is what? Because this is directly from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. أَقْرَبُهُمْ إِلَيْكُمْ بَابًا. Those that have their doors, the closer the door is to your door, the more of a right they have over you. If they have a double relationship or a triple relationship, what does that mean? That they're your neighbors and their family, or and their Muslims. Now it's increased. But it's a general right of all people in every direction around you. I remember one time I was driving and I just left my house, and I live in a Jewish neighborhood. So one of my neighbors flagged me, and they wanted me to turn off the lights in their basement because it was Saturday. And I was like, okay, should I do this? Should I not? And I hope they're watching. Oh no, it's Friday night, it's Saturday. They're definitely not watching. So I was debating, should I do it? Is it something I'm supposed to do or not? I didn't have time to ask a sheikh. I text shuyukh too when I don't know anything. They just take longer to get back to me. And I was wondering, should I ask somebody, should I do this or not? And I just did a cost-benefit analysis of is it, it's not something ritualistic. I'm just shutting off a light. They are my neighbors. So I went inside the house, and I was greeted by the largest Jewish man I ever saw. He was a giant. And he was dressed exactly as they dress outside. Fur hat and everything. I was like, yo, you're inside, man. You could relax. And then they're and the lights were on. I was like, wait, the rest of the lights are on. Why does this? So then, my suspicious meter went off. Maybe they're going to kidnap me. Joke's on them. I don't have any money, but I was like, whatever. At this point, I'm committed. So they said it's in the basement. So I start heading towards where they point where the basement is. 7 Jewish kids come up and look at me. I was wearing a thawb also. I was wearing a thawb, so it was hilarious. At least to me. And all these little Jewish kids came looking at me like, what's he doing in our house? And then I go downstairs, and it's one lamp. It's yeah, just hit the switch. I hit the switch. They say, yeah, that's it, you can go. I was like, yeah, but the rest of the lights are on. What's the wisdom here? I didn't find out. There's no end to the story, but I hope that I was being a good neighbor. That's the point, right? That was the driving force behind my actions. Halfway through, I was wondering if it was, it was a trap, but like I said, I was hopefully driven by the fact that I wanted to be a good neighbor, that this is hopefully neighborly rights that I'm establishing, some kind of help. Something basic. You could do so much to help your neighbor. You see their garbage bin is down the block because the garbage men did you dirty. They threw your garbage bins all over like they do in every neighborhood. Or is it just mine? Bring theirs in as you bring yours in. You cook some food. You have something on Eid, on the holidays. Right? Especially if you're not interacting in their holidays because of that ritualistic block of prohibition, that we don't engage in non-Muslim holidays. So you make sure that when your holidays come around, you tell them, hey, it's our Eid, it's something called Ramadan. I made this for you. So that way they at least don't feel like you're a bad neighbor. So that they can understand when you tell them, oh, it's a religious principle that I don't engage in the other holidays. It's not, oh, this person's a jerk. It's no, that's a religious boundary that they have. They respect it. And they know you're not a jerk because on your holidays, you make sure that they get that ka'k al-Eid. You give them a basket as well. So it's super important to go out of your way to be good neighbors. Least of all that he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it is a sign of the Day of Judgment that people will no longer care for that. It was narrated about one of the people, he had one of the righteous as his neighbor, and he wanted to sell his house. And it was going to fetch a very good price, and he was about to close in on the sale. Then he thought about it, he's like, wait a second. If I leave this house and make this money, and it was a very high price, I'm going to leave this person as my neighbor. I will no longer have that. And he's somebody who, so when he's doing the sale with the person, they're about to close the deal, he says, never mind. He says, what are you doing, man? We already agreed on the price. It's a huge price that you asked for. I didn't haggle you. He's like, I remembered that this person's my neighbor. And I'll never give off his companionship. He visits me when I'm sick. He advises me when I need it. He looks out for me all the time. There's no one like him. And his righteousness just radiates into my home. so I won't give it up. Never mind. The guy's like, whatever, and he leaves. So the neighbor hears of this, and he sends him the asking price of the house. He says, I heard that you were about to make this sale and leave, and you said goodbye to all this money for the sake of staying next to me, so I wanted to send you a gift. It's the same price of the house you asked for. He's like, this guy can't be beat. Like, this is exactly why I stayed next to you. So, not asking you to give money away if you can't, right? I know most people can't, least of all here. It's not an insult. You guys are just young and starting off. It's okay to be broke. But in what ways can you be an exemplary neighbor where people scratch their head and they say, wow, this person's doing something else, especially in this time where people don't care. Start off with those immediately next to you and try your best. He mentioned, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, also qati'atul rahim, those who cut off the ties of kinship. And we've said this before, and we won't get tired of saying it because the stories are still coming in. They're still perpetuating all this nonsense that you see family members establishing between each other, feuds, and we don't talk to them, they don't talk to us. It is your job to be the end of that. Reach out and tell them, I don't care about any of this. I want to have a relationship with you. I want us to be close. I want us to know each other. I don't care what your parents did. I don't care what my parents did. I don't care what they didn't attend or what they threw back in your face. I'm reaching out to tell you that I want to be your cousin. I want to be your friend. I want to see each other. I want our kids to know each other. I want to be the difference that we complain about all the time that we don't see in our families. Because he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, لا يدخل الجنة قاطع رحم. He doesn't enter Jannah the one who severs the tie of kinship. That he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created all creations and they stood before Him before they entered this world, Ar-Rahim, the womb that gives birth, stood up and said, Oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what do I get? What is my share? I'm seeking refuge in you from those that cut me off, those that don't respect this tie of blood. And He responded, subhanahu wa ta'ala, أَمَا تَرْضِينَ أَنْ أَصْلُ مِنْ وَصَلَكِ وَأَقْطَعُ مِنْ قَطَعَكِ. Aren't you satisfied, you, this specific creation, the honor that I'm going to give you, the status that I'm going to give you is that I will connect myself to the ones who seek to connect the ties that you establish. And I will cut myself off from the ones who cut off the ties that you establish, the ties of birth and blood. Reach out to your family members. Squash whatever exists there. If they close the door in your face, if they reject that hand, if they spit in it, it doesn't matter. You tell them, I will always be here. If you need anything, on Eid, when you have a child, when you are sick, I will be here. Because that is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us to do, and I yearn for that connection with Him, and I will never be the first or the last or the second to cut off these ties as long as I have the ability. He said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, finally, whoever believes in Allah on the last day. So it's a example of true faith to establish these ties. And in this hadith, he mentions both the ties of neighborliness and the ties of kinship. And then another hadith, he negated true faith from the people that cut these things off. So many emphasis about these particular points. Another sign, what are we on? 27, 28? Late 20s. Sure. I don't have any insight. I'm going by the estimate. We're definitely in the 20s somewhere. He said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, يكون قوم يغضبون في آخر الزمان بالسواد كالكواصل الحمام لا يريحون رائحة الجنة. People who specifically try to look young. So he mentioned that they dye their beards and they try to style them in a certain fashion to make themselves look young. Is it haram to try to look young? To get rid of these bags and to exfoliate and then refoliate? Is refoliating a thing? Yeah. No, it wasn't a rhetorical question. So there is a hadith against dyeing it black. So some scholars have said that's the problem, but that's disputed in general. Is it haram or just makruh? So that's not the main point. Is it haram to want to look young, get rid of wrinkles? Stay this pristine all the time? So what's the problem here? It's the same thing with the other hadith, like decorating the masajid. Now you are overly attached. These are people who are clawing. And you see these people today that spend tens of millions of dollars a year to try to look, oh, he's 50 but looks 30, what's his secret? It's an obsession of trying to stay holding on to this worldly life that must come to pass, that's already on a timer that always will be. So it's about an obsession, and that's why he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they don't detect the scent of Jannah. They don't even reach it. They can't even smell it, let alone enter it. Not because dyeing your hair or getting rid of wrinkles is haram in and of itself, but it's because of the mindset behind it that they must be doing other things that show their overly attachment to this worldly life. Which leads us to the next sign, inshallah, and we'll wrap it up here. He said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that towards the end of the time, in ashrat as-sa'a, the signs of the hour, and yadhhur ash-shuh, you'll see people being extremely cheap, extremely miserly. It's all in the same theme. He said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the hadith of Muawiyah, he said, I heard the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam say, لا يزداد الأمر إلا شدة ولا يزداد الناس إلا شحة. Things will only get worse, and you'll see the people, a sign of it is they'll get cheaper and cheaper. They're more attached to this wealth than ever before. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us in the Quran, in more than one verse, وَمَنْ يُوقَ شُحَّ نَفْسِهِ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. Who are the successful ones? Those who are protected from their own miserliness. They overcome their own cheapness, their own attachment to worldly things. They can easily give things away for the greater good. They can easily sacrifice. They can easily donate. That just like every other human being, they're hit with the calculations. What about my rent? What about my tuition? What about my debt? But they overcome all of that because they realize that they're purchasing something greater, which is the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is a softness of their heart, which is a detachment of this worldly life, and an interest in the hereafter, which they know they desperately need, which they know will desperately change their character for the better. So overcome your own miserliness in times where donations are asked. Not just with money, your attachment to anything. Our closets are overflowing with clothes that we barely wear, with products. And people bought even more products today, right? How many people engage in Black Friday? No, don't raise your hands. But it's a people pointing you out, man. Now you're going to be the Black Friday guy. I can't get it out of my head. So this concept of over-the-top obsession with materialistic things is killing us all. It's one of the biggest barriers between us hearing these things and actually connecting with them. So it's super important to overcome because it is a sign of the times. He said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that people will become overly miserly and attached to what they have in their hands. He said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in another hadith, وَاتَّقُوا الشُّحْ, protect yourself from miserliness. فَإِنَّ الشُّحْ أَهْلَكَ مَنْ كَانَ قَبْلَكُمْ حَمَلَهُمْ عَلَىٰ أَنْ سَفَكُوا دِمَاءَهُمْ وَاسْتَحَلُّوا مَحَارِمَهُمْ. I warn you against miserliness, being cheap, because it destroyed the people before you. It pushed them to spill each other's blood and to make halal things that were haram. Now they start weakening in their commitment towards each other and towards the rules of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala until it led them towards destruction. We'll stop it here, inshallah. And there's just a few more signs. There's a lot of them are repetitive, where they're kind of just different manifestations of a lot of the things that we spoke about before. But the last thing that I do want to mention, we'll just mention one more very quickly, which is a glimmer of light in the midst of all this darkness. He said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, إِذَا اقْتَرَبَ الزَّمَانِ لَمْ تَكَدْ رُؤْيَا الْمُسْلِمْ تَكْذُبْ وَأَصْدَقُكُمْ رُؤْيَا أَصْدَقُكُمْ حَدِيثًا وَرُؤْيَا الْمُسْلِمْ جُزْءٌ من 45 أو 46 جُزْءًا مِنَ النُّبُوَّةِ. He said, as the times get worse. So all these things that you're hearing, they could be very disheartening. They could be very, very dimming. Like things are just going to get worse and worse. People get cheaper. They ruin their ties of kinship. Their families suck. Their relationship with their neighbors are horrible. They are engaging in immorality and drugs and all these things. Things will just get worse and worse. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never leaves the believers empty-handed. He never leaves them to their own devices. He said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, despite all this getting worse, as the hour gets closer, the Muslim will rarely have a dream except that it will come true. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reinforce them with true dreams. Things that they see and they occur exactly as they have seen them. There was a woman in Gaza who lost her entire home. It was demolished. Family home that they've been building for God knows how long with whatever money they had. And they told her, how did you feel seeing this destruction? She said it was hard, naturally. but I saw the same exact image of it in rubble in a dream, so I knew it was coming. And this is the purpose, the scholars have said, that as times get worse, the Muslim is going to need reinforcement, is going to need encouragement. So sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send that in a dream that occurs before their very eyes exactly as they foresaw. And he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this is 1/46, 1 out of 46 of prophethood. That all the other aspects of prophethood, of miracles, prophecies telling the future, supernatural events that the prophet could control, none of that occurs anymore. Those were reserved to just prophets. But one concept of prophethood that wasn't reserved for just prophets, he said, is true dreams. That will continue to happen to the truest believers. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bless them of this foreseeing of events to aid them and to grant them reinforcement. And he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what is the formula? How do you have two dreams? What should you eat before you go to sleep? It was a joke about the food. It's nothing that you eat. You should eat halal food, but that was just a joke. What do you have to do? It's nothing that you eat. He said, the truest of you in speech will be blessed with the most of this. People who are so keen on sticking to the truth, speaking the truth, supporting the truth, Allah will support them in kind. He's not going to leave them in the midst of all this darkness through their own devices. You figure it out. He's going to reinforce them. And something very interesting, he said this is 1 out of 46 of prophethood. And we have the hadith of Aisha about revelation. Before revelation began, he would see, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, true dreams. And they would occur, he would see them at night, and the very next day they would occur like the rising of the sun. Exactly as he foresaw. And this happened for how long? For 6 months before revelation began. How long was he a prophet for? 23 years. 6 months divided by 23 years is 1 out of 46. It's not like he knew that exactly when he was going to die, like, oh, let me do the math and let me tell them so it could work out. He didn't know that, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but he's telling them in this hadith it's 1/46 of prophethood, and he was a prophet for exactly 46 months. And he had true dreams for 6 months before that. He was a prophet, for 23 years, and then for half a year that they saw that the true dream, so that's 1 out of 46. So it's another interesting manifestation of prophethood. When does this happen? The scholars differed exactly. They said when the knowledge gets less and the people have less to rely on, less people to ask, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala still won't leave them in the dark. When they do their best with what they know, when they do their best with what they have access to, Allah will support them with these visions, things they see while they're sleeping that reinforce their faith and let them know to keep going. Others mentioned that this will happen when there's less Muslims where they are in their locale. And we see that in Gaza where there's no one supporting them, where they have no one to turn to, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them a supernatural support. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala won't see you trying to go against the current in the midst of everything that we were describing. The last 20 or so signs getting darker and darker, worse and worse. And He sees you trying to hold on in the midst of all that and says, oh, figure it out, let's see how you fare. That's not how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will react. He will make sure that you stay firm and He will support you whether with true dreams or not. Some people say, well, how come I don't see true dreams? Maybe you have enough to keep going where you don't need it. You have the support system, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to latch onto that. It's like the saying goes, they told me to follow my dreams, so I went to sleep. Some people, that's their attitude towards it. Like, okay, let me just keep sleeping. And that's not how it works. If you have enough of a support system around you, maybe you don't need that. You just need to utilize what you already have around you that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you and put in your vicinity that tons of people don't have. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bless you in that and put barakah in that. So don't wait for revelation or for a dream to reinforce what you're doing. If you know that it is true, if you know that this is what's right, capitalize on that already, that you have that certainty, you have these sources and you have access to these things, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will support you, bless that effort and give you the ability to keep going. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fortify us, forgive our shortcomings. Inshallah, we'll have time for some questions, but I believe social service has an announcement. Bismillah. Do you want the chair?
No, it's okay.
It's powerful.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Jana, and I'm here from the Social Services Department. We are very dedicated to supporting our community with a range of services through our 4 committees. We have mental wellness, family wellness, preventative advocacy care, and special needs. Our team provides resources and referrals tailored to each one of you guys' needs, with office hours every Saturday from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. in our second floor room by the elevator. Additionally, we also host events and have our mental health pop-up here in the center every last Friday of the month and last Saturday of the month at Mass Staten Island. Please stop by today for some resources and to speak with us, or keep an eye out for us next time. And we're here to serve and support you all as we work together to strengthen our community, inshallah. Jazakallah khair, and inshallah I'll see you all outside in the lobby. Thank you.
Are there any questions with what we covered today? You had a hand up, somebody. Where's Ahmed? You had a hand up. Never mind, never minded. Done. Yeah, Zach.
Talking about breaking kinship.
Mm-hmm.
How much do you keep trying? Like if you keep going back to that person, telling them, hey, I'm here. You're not talking to you. Hey, I'm here. You're not talking to you. Just keep when's it stop?
You just keep doing it. Keep doing it as often as you can, as often as you're able to, as long as you're not being actively harmed. Like every time you go there, they clock you, for example. If there's no active physical threat or some kind of real harm to you, even emotional, let's say like every time you go you get cursed out or treated very nasty or in a way that harms you, as long as that's not the case, you keep trying. Text them every Eid. Text them every month once, like, hey, just checking in on you. No response, or they respond with a colorful adjectives. It's okay. You just keep going. That way that on the Day of Judgment, you're not blameworthy in the least, and you did your part. And you'll be rewarded for it. And this is the highest manifestation of Silat al-Rahim. Of course, it's praiseworthy and it's rewarding if you guys reciprocate good to each other. But when it's not being reciprocated, that's the true test and the true reward is in that. So you just keep it up as constant as you can. You don't have to do it every 24 hours. Hey, just checking in on you. That might get annoying. But maybe every other week, once a month, the holidays for sure. When anything happens to them, good or bad, following up. And if they continue to reject that, you did your part. There's only so much that you can control and you're doing your best. Sisters, go ahead. So I'm going to be honest, like I feel like in our generation we use that too liberally. It's a toxic relationship. Yeah, most relationships are toxic, or they have manifestations of toxicity in them. That's the truth of it, because everybody's dealing with what they're dealing with. There's very few relationships that have zero toxicity, and that's okay. We try our best to filter that, and we do our best. But if it's to the point where you're being physically harmed, for example, then no, you're not bound by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to put yourself in the way of physical harm. Someone's actually physically hurting you. When it comes to emotional harm now, you're still allowed to protect yourself, to keep some distance, to keep yourself safe from insults or from being degraded. That's important. So if you have to put up some boundaries and keep some distance to keep yourself safe in that regards, that's allowed. But the reason I started with we use that too liberally is because in our society today we do. And family ties have no worth. It's like, oh, they're toxic, cut them off. It's their loss. You know, they'll learn when you cut them off. And that gets thrown out so easily, and it's not true. This is a religiously sanctioned relationship by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we must do our best to upkeep. So keep that in mind. And if they are, again, verbally abusing you, emotionally abusing you, spiritually abusing you, you're allowed to keep a distance to protect yourself. When do you cut it off completely? It's when you're under some real physical harm, for example. Or even emotional harm if it's coming to the point where, you know, it's tough to say without specifics, which you don't have to give me, but it's getting to the point where you're being, you know, abused regularly in a very, very horrendous type of way. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about the parents, وَإِن جَاهَدَاكَ, if they do jihad against you, they're striving against you for you to become a kafir, that they're disbelievers themselves, and they're trying their best to strive to make you a disbeliever. فَلَا تُطِعْهُمَا, don't obey them. He didn't say disrespect them, cut them off. He said don't obey that command. وَصَاحِبُهُمَا فِي الدُّنْيَا مَعْرُوفًا, and be their companion in this world and all that is good. That's your duty. If they are trying their best to make you a kafir. So it means everything less than that, and of course that's for the parents, but it applies to others as well.
If they're not doing that, then your obligation towards them is even greater. But again, if you're being abused, you're being physically harmed or spiritually harmed or even emotionally harmed, you're allowed to take some distance. You don't have to be there daily. If every time you speak to them or interact with them, there's some harm to you, even emotional harm counts, then maybe daily is not the solution. Weekly, bi-weekly. So that way you're not cutting them off, like it's not complete absolvement for yourself from the relationship, but you're not putting yourself in harm's way. Let me bounce this way so I could be equal for genders. Yasin? If you guys aren't good, if this is like your norm of communication and you guys are just used to it, like you have cousins across the world, for example, or even here, and like your norm of communication is not so regular, try to make it a little bit more regular. It's sinful to the point where someone's being harmed. Like, why is this person not talking to me? Or they feel like they're being cut off. That's your job to make sure they don't feel that. But let's say you regularly communicate like just a couple of times a year and everyone's okay with that. That's okay, but I would say try to increase it. That's okay, meaning you're not sinful. But you should strive to make it a more meaningful relationship. Think of your friends and how close you are with them. And that's natural if you see them more than a cousin who you don't see very often. But that relationship should be improved. Should be improved upon. Even if it's not technically bad right now, try to increase it because of the amount of reward in it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it by default more important than friendship. So you're not sinful if everyone's okay and no one's hurt by it. But then try to increase it because there's definitely good in doing that. Instead of like, it being a couple times a year, make it every month, once a month. Hey, how you doing? Just want to say salam. If they say stop being a weirdo and leave me alone, then you could do it bi-monthly, I guess. Let me bounce this way. I'll be right back. Go ahead, sister. So if you could go behind your mother's back, is this being recorded? No, good, it's being recorded. Everyone should hear this. If your parents command you with something like, look, me and their mom or their dad are beefing, so you can never talk to them, absolutely not. Try to, in today's world, it's, you got digital communication, you have social media. Definitely establish a connection where they don't need to know. Your parents don't need to know. They're commanding you to do something haram, something that's very heinous. It's a huge haram. It's not like a small haram. Not that we look at the size of it. It's disobeying our Creator. And the Prophet ﷺ told us, لا طاعة لمخلوق في معصية الخالق. There is no obedience to a creation if it denotes disobedience to the Creator. Do we have to obey our parents? Yes, you do. You have to obey their commands. Should you obey this command? No, you shouldn't, because it's haram. So don't talk to this person because me and their mom are beefing. Well, tell them that's your problem. Arm wrestle it out and figure it out. But for me and her, we're cousins, and even you and that aunt. If you're able to continue a connection without your parents knowing, and even if they were to find out, say with all due respect, I respect you and I love you and I would love to obey anything else as long as it's not causing me to disobey my Creator. But if you could avoid that whole conversation altogether and just keep them in the dark, everybody's happy. Your dad's right there, so you set us all up. I'm just answering the questions as they come, Let me get this way and I'll come back. Go ahead, brother. Halal turkey is important. Thanksgiving is over, so ask this question next year. So, to break it down with more detail will take some time. I won't do that here. But the basics of it is that we don't celebrate ritualistic holidays, especially when they are public ritualistic holidays of other anythings, religions, nations. Many of the scholars have said if it's a private holiday, that's not a public one with no rituals in it, then it could be fine as long as there's no purposeful copying of non-Muslim culture. For example, birthdays. Birthdays not public. It's just for you personally and your family. And as long as you don't copy any of their culture, especially if it's ritualistic, like what? Blowing the candles. It's a ritual. And it has its origins in very shirky things. So avoid the rituals. You and your friends go out and have a nice dinner. Maybe they get you some gifts. That's generally okay according to some scholars. The more conservative side, which has a ton of scholarship behind it throughout Islamic history, is any non-Islamic holiday is haram, including anything. as long as it's considered a holiday, it's recurring, and it's celebrated by other cultures, we shouldn't engage. So that's on the more conservative side. On the more liberal side of the argument is anything that is not religious in origin. So something like Independence Day or Labor Day. Labor Day is about trees, right? Isn't it? Labor Day is not about trees? Earth Day. Teacher Appreciation Day. Those would be fine because they're non-religious in nature. That's on the more liberal side. And somewhere in between is the opinion that I shared with you, which is the opinion of my teacher, Dr. Hatem al-Hajj, which is that anything that is non-public, meaning it's not a society thing, it's a personal thing, your anniversary, your birthday, the day you were baptized, things like that. And then it's okay to celebrate those as long as you stay away from the rituals that other people do. But something like Thanksgiving, is it religious? It's about thanking God for food, so I would say it's pretty religious. It's also based on a lie and the genocide of the Native American people, which created this nation. So I want us to consider that in 100 years, when they finish putting out the people of Palestine because this ummah is dead asleep and not doing anything about it, maybe they'll have a holiday where they say, this is when the Palestinians welcomed us with maqluba and Israeli za'atar and we had a great time. And people will celebrate that. How mad would you be? Go on YouTube and look up a video of what Native Americans think of Columbus Day and Thanksgiving. They have videos about it. And they're enraged, they're in tears just saying, we can't believe that we just have to watch people celebrate every single year the hundreds of millions of our people that were put to death. And all of this is replacing it now. Imagine if it was your people. Imagine if that happened with Palestine in the next couple of decades. So we should be a little bit more aware of what we engage in and why. We don't just say, well, I'm just having a turkey. You can have turkey any other day. Turkey's not even all that. So, this side? Go ahead, Dunya. It's off topic. Let's stick to on topic. Well, at this point, we'll just do one on each side. Go ahead. Start over, sorry. There's no serious opinion from what I know that says like something like carpets is bid'ah. It's just a difference of culture. Things changed, and that happened very, very early on. You're talking about the first maybe 100 years or 200 years where carpets became a norm in the masajid. But for the first 2 centuries, people prayed with their shoes on. The Prophet ﷺ prayed with his shoes on in a non-carpeted masjid. And carpets in masajid was introduced very, very early, maybe in the first couple of centuries. But for centuries, people didn't have carpets in the masajid. Maybe even longer than a couple of centuries. But it became a norm like over 1,000 years ago, about, or maybe even less. You could look up the history of carpets in masajid, that's not the point. And first they had mats before they had carpets, just straw mats that people could pray on. And the purpose of that was to keep it clean. Because people were coming and going, they had their shoes on. And sometimes, they're engaged in farming or different things and they don't know what's on their shoes. So they decided that they would add mats into carpets and then mats into masajid, and carpets came later. And carpets becoming the norm across all masajid, is only very recent. I meant to say the opposite. It's very recent where every single masjid you go to has a carpet. That's in the last, 200 years or something. So no one ever really, from what I know, my limited knowledge, said that it's a bid'ah. It's just a change of culture. It's a norm. It's cleaner. And it's something that is permissible. Like there's nothing that says that praying on a carpet is not allowed. So the argument for it being bid'ah is not very strong from my limited knowledge. So if somebody wants to add on top of that a prayer rug because it's their own personal prayer rug, there's nothing problematic that I see in it. Some people do it for hygiene reasons. So it's not the biggest deal. I would definitely say don't be obsessive over it. People have been making sujood in the same spot where other Muslims made sujood for centuries. So people who say things like, oh, I don't want to make sujood here. People are making sujood here all day long and they're sneezing on here. That's fine. That's okay. We've been doing that for centuries, and then it's not something that we're worried about. And it's not something that we should think too much about at all. If there's some kind of illness going on, like COVID, where, depending if you believe COVID was real or not, it's definitely looking kind of gray at this point. But if something like that happens, so everybody has their own prayer mat, or it's that's all fine, because the reason for it is not religious. It's some other necessity that people see or don't see. But in general, these things are all fine. We definitely shouldn't obsess over them or make them a big deal. Some things that people do that I would mention that would fall under obsessing over them or making them a big deal, which is like, oh, I put my prayer mat here, so don't pray here. I reserved the spot using the prayer mat. That shouldn't happen. You either come on time or you don't. Can't come on time and then leave a prayer mat here, then go do whatever, then come back, say, well, my prayer mat is here. That's not very, very respectful to others, or it's not what we should be doing in the masajid. It doesn't promote a welcoming atmosphere. Or, for example, someone prays on your prayer mat, or one time where you can't pray on it, so some people, none of that should ever be a big deal. But if you want to do it and you pray on a prayer mat, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. Do we have one more on this side? Go ahead, Amr.
So it's easy to actually be okay. This holiday is religious in nature from its origins. But when it comes to like rituals, how do you know something's a ritual or not?
Wikipedia. Look it up. Where did this come from? Blowing candles, for example. Even birthday celebrations, to some extent, has a religious origin in some cultures, but it's not very clear cut. As opposed to blowing the candles, no, you could look where that came up from. I don't remember it now, but it is superstition. Like, same thing with Halloween. Those are all rituals. Religious rituals that go back to Celtic traditions, Northern Europe, Ireland, those kind of places. Spirits, appeasing gods, gratitude for the harvest. It's kind of where everything comes from. So we have our own way of gratitude and our own way of appeasing our only creator that exists, and we don't ever engage in something that would originate in those faulty origins. That's a way of compromising tawheed. I said it's the last one, but you'll be the last one.
It's more of a statement. Thanksgiving also, like the history of it, you see like we're celebrating Native Americans dying. So like it just got whitewashed by America. So look at that.
Yeah, it goes back to the eras of deception that he foretold, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where the truth is just being spontaneously, arbitrarily produced by people who are in power, and no one cares about the reality of things. That's another duty of the Muslim. You can't just go with the flow with that. That makes no sense. Jazakumullah khairan. Everyone will call it a night here. Subhanaka wa bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Sallallahu barak ala sayyidina Muhammad wa sahbihi.